Soul, Nature and God. The fourth Jnana Yoga class for beginners, delivered at 228 West 39th Street, New York, on Wednesday evening, 15 January 1896, and recorded by Mr. Josiah J. Goodwin. According to the Vedanta philosophy, man consists of three substances, so to say. The outermost is the body, the gross form of man, in which are the instruments of sensation, such as the eyes, nose, ears, and so forth. This eye is not the organ of vision, it is only the instrument. Behind that is the organ. So the ears are not the organs of hearing, they are the instruments, and behind them is the organ, or what in modern physiology is called the center. The organs are called indriyas in Sanskrit. If the center which governs the eyes be destroyed, the eyes will not see. So with all our senses. The organs again cannot sense anything by themselves until there be something else attached to them. That something is the mind. Many times you have observed that you were deeply engaged in a certain thought and the clock struck and you did not hear it. Why? The ear was there. Vibrations entered it and were carried into the brain, yet you did not hear because the mind was not joined to the organ. The impressions of external objects are carried to the organs, and when the mind is attached to them, it takes the impressions and gives them, as it were, a coloring, which is called egoism, I. Take the case of a mosquito biting me on the finger when I am engaged in some work. I do not feel it because my mind is joined to something else. Later, when my mind is joined to the impression conveyed to the indriyas, a reaction comes. With this reaction, I become conscious of the mosquito. So even the mind joining itself to the organs is not sufficient. There must come the reaction, generally in the form of will. This faculty from which the reaction comes and real knowledge begins, the faculty of knowledge or intellect, is called buddhi. First, there must be the external instrument. Next, the internal organ. Next, the mind must join itself to the organ. Then must come the reaction of the intellect. And when all these things are complete, there immediately flashes the idea, I and the external object. And there is a perception, a concept, knowledge. The external organ, which is only the instrument, is in the body, and behind that is the internal organ, which is finer. Then there is the mind, then the intellectual faculty, then egoism, which says, I see, I hear, and so forth. The whole process is carried on by certain forces. You may call them vital forces. In Sanskrit, they are called prana. This gross part of man, this body, in which are the external instruments, is called in Sanskrit sthula sharira, the gross body. Behind it comes the series beginning with the sense organs and followed by the mind, the intellect, and egoism. These and the vital forces form a compound which is called the fine body, the sukshma sharira. These forces are composed of very fine elements, so fine that no amount of injury to this body can destroy them. They survive all the shocks given to this body. The gross body we see is composed of gross material, and as such it is always being renewed and changing continuously. But the internal organs, the mind, the intellect, and the egoism are composed of the finest material, so fine that they will endure for eons and eons. They are so fine that they cannot be resisted by anything. They can get through any obstruction. The gross body is non-intelligent. So is the fine, being composed of fine matter. Although one part is called mind, another the intellect, and the third egoism, yet we see at a glance that no one of them can be the knower. None of them can be the perceiver, the witness, the one for whom action is made, and who is the seer of the action. All these movements in the mind, or the faculty of intellection or egoism, must be for someone else. These, being composed of fine matter, cannot be self-effulgent. Their luminosity cannot be in themselves. This manifestation of the table, for instance, cannot be due to any material thing. Therefore, there must be someone behind them all who is the real manifester, the real seer, the real enjoyer, and he in Sanskrit is called the Atman, the soul of man, the real self of man. He it is who really sees things. The external instruments and the inner organs catch the impressions and convey them to the mind, and the mind to the intellect. And the intellect reflects them as on a mirror, and back of it is the soul that looks on them and gives his orders and his directions. He is the ruler of all these instruments, the master in the house, the enthroned king in the body. The faculty of egoism, the faculty of intellection, the faculty of cogitation, the organs, the instruments, the body, all of them obey his commands. It is he who is manifesting all of these out of the elements. This is the Atman of man. Similarly, we can see that what is in a small part of the universe must also be in the whole universe. If conformity is the law of the universe, every part of the universe must have been built on the same plan as the whole. So we naturally think that behind the gross material form, which we call this universe of ours, there must be a universe of finer matter which we call thought. And behind that, there must be a soul which presupposes all this thought, which commands, which is the enthroned king of this universe. That soul which is behind each mind and each body is called Pratyagatman, the individual Atman, and that soul which is behind the universe as its guide, ruler, and governor is God. The next thing to consider is whence all these things come. The answer is, what is meant by coming? If it means that something can be produced out of nothing, it is impossible. All this creation, this manifestation, cannot be produced out of zero. Nothing can be produced without a cause, and the effect is but the cause reproduced. And again, we must apply our rule. If the whole of this universe is built on the same plan, then if we analyze one bit of it, we know the laws by which the whole of this cosmos is built. Here is a glass. Suppose we break it to pieces and pulverize it, and by means of chemicals almost annihilate it. Will it go back to zero? Certainly not. The form will break, but the particles of which it is made will be there. They will go beyond our senses, but they remain. And it is quite possible that out of these materials another glass may be made. If this is true in one case, it will be so in every case. Something cannot be made out of nothing, nor can something be made to go back to nothing. It may become finer and finer, and then again grosser and grosser. Take the case of a plant. We find the material particles coming together and becoming finer and finer in the seed. And then they become grosser and grosser till they become the tree, which in turn dies and decays and finally disappears. Again, out of the same particles, possibly another tree will come, growing grosser and grosser. The whole universe is going on in this way. Just as with individuals and particular things, so it must be with the whole universe. It naturally follows, therefore, that there comes a time when this whole universe melts down and becomes finer, and at last disappears entirely, as it were, but remains as superfine matter. We know now by modern science and astronomy that this earth of ours is cooling down. And in crores of years it will become very cold, and then it will break to pieces, and then into finer and finer pieces, until it becomes ether once more. Yet the particles will all remain to form the material out of which another earth is to be made. Again that will break, and another earth will come out. So this universe is going down to its causes, and its materials are coming together and taking form, like a wave that falls down and rises again to take form. So this period of falling down of the universe, disappearing and again coming up is called a kalpa. In Sanskrit, this is called sankocha and vikasha, which means shrinking and expanding. The whole universe, as it were, shrinks and then expands again. To use the more accepted words of modern science, they are involved and evolved. You hear about evolution, how all forms grow from lower ones, slowly growing up and up. This is very true. One thing is to be added, that each evolution presupposes an involution. Here modern science will again help us. We know that the sum total of energy that is displayed in the universe is the same at all times, and that matter is indestructible. By no means can you take away one particle of matter. You cannot take away a foot-pound of energy or add one. The sum total is the same always. Only the manifestation varies, being involved and evolved. So this cycle of creation that we are in is the evolution out of the involution of the previous cycle. And this cycle will again be involved, getting finer and finer. And out of that will come the next cycle. The whole universe is going on in this fashion. Thus we find that there is no creation, in the sense that something is created out of nothing. To use a better word, there is manifestation, and God is the manifester of the universe. The universe, as it were, is being breathed out of him, and again it shrinks into him, and again he throws it out. A most beautiful metaphor is given in the Vedas. That eternal one breathes out this universe and breathes it in, just as we breathe out a little particle of dust and breathe it in again. That is all very good, but the question may be asked, how was it at the first cycle? The answer is, what is the meaning of a first cycle? There was none. If you can give a beginning to time, the whole concept of time will be destroyed. Try to think of a limit where time began. You have to think of time beyond that limit. Try to think where space begins. You will have to think of space beyond that. Time and space are infinite and therefore have neither beginning nor end. This is a better idea than the idea that God created the universe in 5 minutes and then went to sleep, and since then has been sleeping. On the other hand, this idea will give us God as the eternal creator. Here is a series of waves rising and falling, and God is directing this eternal process. As the universe is without beginning and without end, so is God. We see that it must necessarily be so, because if we say that there was a time when there was no creation, either in a gross or a fine form, then there was no God, because God is known to us as the Sakshin, the witness of the universe. When the universe did not exist, neither did He. One concept follows the other. The idea of the cause we get from the idea of the effect. And if there is no effect, there will be no cause. It naturally follows that as the universe is eternal, God is eternal. The soul must also be eternal. Why? In the first place, we see that the soul is not matter. It is neither a gross body nor a fine body, which we call mind or thought. It is neither a physical body nor what in Christianity is called a spiritual body. It is the gross body and the spiritual body that are liable to change. The gross body is liable to change almost every minute and dies, but the spiritual body endures through long periods until one becomes free, when it also falls away. When a man becomes free, the spiritual body disperses. The gross body disintegrates every time a man dies. The soul, not being made of any particles, must be indestructible. What do we mean by destruction? Destruction is disintegration of the materials out of which anything is composed. If this glass is broken into pieces, the materials will disintegrate, and that will be the destruction of the glass. Disintegration of particles is what we mean by destruction. It naturally follows that nothing that is not composed of particles can be destroyed, can ever be disintegrated. The soul is not composed of any materials. It is unity, indivisible. Therefore, it must be indestructible. For the same reason, it must also be without any beginning. So, the soul is without any beginning or end. We have three entities. Here is nature, which is infinite but changeful. The whole of nature is without beginning and end, but within it are multifarious changes. It is like a river that runs down to the sea for thousands of years. It is the same river always, but it is changing every minute. The particles of water are changing their position constantly. Then there is God, unchangeable, the ruler. And there is the soul, unchangeable as God, eternal, but under the ruler. One is the master, the other the servant, and the third one is nature. God being the cause of the projection, the continuance, and the dissolution of the universe, the cause must be present to produce the effect. Not only so, the cause becomes the effect. Glass is produced out of certain materials and certain forces used by the manufacturer. In the glass, there are those forces plus the materials. The forces used have become the force of adhesion. And if that force goes, the glass will fall to pieces. The materials also are undoubtedly in the glass. Only their form is changed. The cause has become the effect. Wherever you see an effect, you can always analyze it into a cause. The cause manifests itself as the effect. It follows, if God is the cause of the universe and the universe is the effect, that God has become the universe. If souls are the effect and God the cause, God has become the souls. Each soul, therefore, is a part of God. As from a mass of fire an infinite number of sparks fly, even so from the Eternal One all this universe of souls has come out. We have seen that there is the eternal God and there is eternal nature. And there is also an infinite number of eternal souls. This is the first stage in religion. It is called dualism, the stage when man sees himself and God eternally separate, when God is a separate entity by himself and nature is a separate entity by itself. This is dualism, which holds that the subject and the object are opposed to each other in everything. When man looks at nature, he is the subject and nature the object. He sees the dualism between subject and object. When he looks at God, he sees God as the object and himself as the subject. They are entirely separate. This is the dualism between man and God. This is generally the first view of religion. Then comes another view, which I have just shown to you. Man begins to find out that if God is the cause of the universe, and the universe the effect, God himself must have become the universe and the souls, and the soul is but a particle of which God is the whole. We are but little beings, sparks of that mass of fire, and the whole universe is a manifestation of God himself. This is the next step. In Sanskrit it is called Vishishta Advaita. Just as I have this body, and this body covers the soul, and the soul is in and through this body, so this whole universe of infinite souls and nature forms, as it were, the body of God. When the period of involution comes, the universe becomes finer and finer, yet remains the body of God. When the gross manifestation comes, then also the universe remains the body of God. Just as the human soul is the soul of the human body and mind, so God is the soul of our souls. All of you have heard this expression in every religion. Soul of our souls. That is what is meant by it. He, as it were, resides in them, guides them, is the ruler of them all. In the first view, that of dualism, each one of us is an individual, eternally separate from God and nature. In the second view, we are individuals, but not separate from God. We are like little particles floating in one mass, and that mass is God. We are individuals, but one in God. We are all in Him. We are all parts of Him, and therefore we are one. And yet, between man and man and God, there is a strict individuality, separate and yet not separate. Then comes a still finer question. The question is, can infinity have parts? What is meant by parts of infinity? If you reason it out, you will find that it is impossible. Infinity cannot be divided. It always remains infinite. If it could be divided, each part would be infinite, and there cannot be two infinities. Suppose there were, one would limit the other, and both would be finite. Infinity can only be one, undivided. Thus the conclusion will be reached that the infinite is one and not many, and that one infinite soul is reflecting itself through thousands and thousands of mirrors, appearing as so many different souls. And yet, it is the same infinite soul which is the background of nature that we call God. The same infinite soul also is the background of the human mind, which we call the human soul